This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Welcome to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Second straight show without our fearless leader, but we will try to shoulder on. Yep. And we have a little breaking news. The breaking news for all you Supreme Court junkies is that the so-called Biden Commission, which on the expansion of the courts, was released today. And I want to say they had a formal name for it, but they didn't exactly embrace the idea of expanding the size of the court, which now stands at 9 justices. And famously, I have my rule of 3, and oftentimes it's 5 to 4 because Justice Roberts is somewhat of an incrementalist. But for those of you who don't know, the size of the Supreme Court is not a constitutional issue. The size of the Supreme Court has varied over the years, but it has been at 9 for decades now. And there has been a lot of people who made the argument for expanding the court for a variety of reasons. And this, I thought, was a very well done. I haven't digested all of it, but for the most part, their conclusions, they've come to the conclusion that maybe instead of expanding the court, that we impose term limits, which, by the way, I think is a brilliant idea. We have term limits here in California but then you stand for election with state court judges. So, for instance, a trial court judge in California would be on the bench for 6 years. A Court of Appeals justice in the California Supreme Court justice, which, by the way, is not 9 justices, it's 7 justices. They go up for election every 14 years. And that's really not a contested election. There are other states like Pennsylvania and some others where you have what are more traditionally thought of as contested elections. And California is basically a retention. It's am I going to retain? Not like a recall where am I going to recall or am I going to retain? Then if not, who's my other candidate? Here, you're up every 6 or 14, depending on how high up the totem pole you are. Can I still say totem pole? I think I can.
I don't know.
I know I can't say off the reservation. I would never say off the reservation except to condemn the use of the term. But I think this is a brilliant idea for a number of reasons. Number one, I think in part of this article, Gary, they mentioned something which I had never really thought of. And they say that this is the only major constitutional democracy that does not have term limits.
Correct.
Yeah, that's an amazing statement when you think about it. You have obviously constitutional term limits for the president, which were not always the case, obviously, with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who coincidentally had 4 terms, died in his 4th term, and was the last president who really pushed for an expansion of the court. So not having term limits, I think, is a bad idea, and for a number of reasons. Number one, you don't necessarily want people to just kind of be cheerleaders. You want them to engage. The whole idea of checks and balances of a constitutional republic and democracy. Number two, as a practical matter, I never really understood the idea that it's come into stark relief in the last month. New associate salaries, and Adam always kids me that the reason I rail against this is because I'm trying to keep my payroll down. But the idea that new associates straight out of law school are going to be making $250,000, well, the client's going to pay for that. And there's no way in the world you can justify that. I've yet to meet a brand new law graduate who is worth half of $250,000. Sorry, I'll go to my grave thinking that. But the irony of that is that exceeds, except with the exception of the Chief Justice, I think, it meets or exceeds what the Supreme Court makes. How in the world do you justify that? And if you had I think the commission here recommended 18-year terms, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. I think 14 is about right. And if, we used to have a rule of thumb in California for state court judges. I always wanted judges who took a pay cut to become a judge.
Yeah.
And I wasn't thinking of big firm lawyers necessarily, but sometimes that's not a bad thing. I was thinking more people who had to earn a living, meet a payroll, deal with real clients, who were not getting on the bench because that was their highest paid job. But put that aside for a second. Why shouldn't a Supreme Court justice have a 14, 18-year term? Say you get appointed in your 40s, and then in your 60s, you go earn some money on your way out the door, or go do something else. You could be somebody who earns your money before you take the bench, do your public service, and then go out the door that way as well.
I couldn't agree more. I think it would be excellent. I mean, I wasn't planning to take it here, and this is not something you and I have discussed, though I should have sent it to you yesterday when I saw it. But there's been some footage that came out this week of one of our highest esteemed justices towards, the end of her career, and she sounds a little out of touch, frankly. Do you know what I'm referring to here?
I do. I do. And there's been all kinds of, there's been a very vibrant discussion by Justice Breyer, Justice Barrett, Justice Alito, famously in Philadelphia. In fact, if you've got that clip, Gary, I'd love to drop it in, because he is adamant. And a lot of this comes on the heels of the Texas abortion decision, and that's kind of reignited this idea of the court or expanding the court or this or that. Interestingly, this report also addressed what has been the 6-year-old phrase that has been coined, the shadow docket. And the shadow docket deals with the emergency stays and what the practice of law that happens kind of with one or more justices or per curiam. Interestingly, they addressed that as well. And they pointed out a couple of the things that are somewhat, I think, plain to people who follow. Where do you draw the bright line on what is an important case, what's not an important case? Every case is important to somebody who files a writ or a petition in the U.S. Supreme Court. So all you're doing is backing up the decision as to what the hurdle is to even get there in the first place. And for everybody who was condemning Justice Alito, remember, Justice Breyer was saying the same thing that I guess Justice Coney Barrett famously said we're not partisan hacks recently, while she was at the minority leaders' nonpartisan or bipartisan judicial center, which is kind of ironic, I suppose.
Delightful.
Isn't that you're going to go speak at that place of the guy who may be the single most partisan guy right behind Chuck Schumer? So I find that to be hilarious. Do you have that clip by any chance, Gary?
I don't. Unfortunately, we're a little short-staffed, maybe alluding to something we touched on before we started recording. So maybe we'll get it in for the big show this week.
Don't worry, it doesn't. It goes beyond the podcast world. Try to find anybody. I thought that there would be an influx of people wanting to work as of October 1st. So far, that has not materialized.
It's not panning out that way. It's a little strange. Well, hey, look, I don't, as much as the Supreme Court, we can talk about that for an hour, but there are a few more things we got to cover today.
Well, we got to cover one case, which I think is kind of ironic, or maybe not ironic as much as interesting. There's a case where a woman filed by her initials, I think MO, modus operandi, a case where she was suing the insurance company of a guy that she had sex with in a car and claims to get HPV, notwithstanding the causation issues of that. The judge in that case said, let me see if I got this right. You just filed a public lawsuit for having sex in a car.
I have the quote.
Okay.
Judge Mitchell said, quote, any allegedly private details became less private a parenthesis, although the court questions how private those details actually were if they were having sex in a car, when MO sent Geico a demand letter making an insurance coverage claim. This guy is delightful. I want to buy this guy a 12-pack and sit and watch a baseball game with him. This guy's great.
And, you wonder what the lawyer was advising the client. Maybe the lawyer will phone in and we can ask. When you're doing the demand letter to Geico, knowing what insurance companies do whenever you're going to war with them, I mean, seriously, you don't think they're just going to go, send that over to their crisis management company and try to expose this person and humiliate them?
It's just absolutely delightful. All right. We also, I guess, should give a quick update. Not a ton to say, but Alex Murdaugh has been arrested, finally.
Yeah, but get this. For those who've been following this case, he was arrested once for insurance fraud, I believe.
Correct. And he was released.
He was released on $20,000 bond on condition he go and enroll in a substance abuse center. Great. Because by all accounts, his lawyer, Dick Harpootlian, has said that he has a raging opioid addiction that was exacerbated by the murder of his wife and son. Fine. And he went to Orlando, I believe,
yes,
to check in, right?
Correct. He did. He entered a treatment center in Florida.
Okay. As he's being checked out of the treatment center, he gets arrested on the new charges, which relate to the housekeeper whose death was apparently suspicious, and there was a settlement, and there were issues as to the disbursements of the settlement, and it's just wild.
Right. So to be clear, for anyone who hasn't been following this as closely as we have, or along with us every single episode, you made it. What you said there makes it sound like maybe he was arrested for this woman's death, but no, he was arrested for allegedly keeping the $5 million that were earmarked, $5 million roughly, that were earmarked for her children, one of whom is special needs, and then extracting that money using shady bank accounts and stuff like that, keeping it for himself. So yeah, he was arrested for that, and we'll keep an eye on it. I mean, it's just, SLED came out, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division came out and made a statement that basically, yeah, we got him, we're arresting him for this, but we expect to be in the Alex Murdaugh business quite a bit in the coming months and years. So I think there's a lot more to come on that front.
Then there's another case that we've been following, which is the Gabrielle Petito case.
Yep.
Petito. And Brian Laundrie is the person of interest, although there is a warrant out for debit card abuse or fraud. And a lot of other lawyers have asked me, why isn't there a murder warrant out? Why is there just a debit card fraud out? And I believe, and I have it's only been strengthened today by some of the things that have come out. I think that what the authorities are trying to do is to construct a timeline. And they're trying to construct a timeline based on the last known use of that debit card, because presumably the debit card would have some camera or some other signature of who was using it. And because this woman's remains were found a number of weeks and were presumably in the wild, the decomposition would make it incredibly difficult to narrow down the time frame upon which she was alive. And you compound that with the fact that her parents came out and questioned immediately whether one of the texts from her was really from her. So that also throws something in there. So I think what they've probably done, and I've seen this in countless murder cases, where they find a body that is in a decomposed state. They've probably called in some experts. Sometimes it's an expert on insects. Sometimes it's an expert on other kinds of disciplines that revolve around the decomposition of the body and the kinds of things that happen in terms of ambient factors. And that usually takes a little longer. My guess is they're trying to pin down a time period that they then can say, okay, now we've got enough to go after a murder warrant for Brian Laundrie. And in the interim, probably trying to put together other pieces of circumstantial evidence. One of the criticisms, by the way, that I've seen, which is I think well taken is, why didn't the authorities take the van, the famous white van in this case, always in these cases seem to be white vans, but why didn't they take the white van for a search of trace evidence of some kind? Because a lot of the sleuths, online sleuths, have been talking about that. And I think that's a fair criticism of the authorities.
I think it's a very fair criticism. I've been saying since we started covering this case, why were they not watching this guy's house by the time I became aware of this? Because it was already news. It's just crazy to me. But we'll keep an eye on that one and all these stories we've been covering. I'm just going to tell the audience so that they can hope along with me that fingers crossed Mark might be in studio for the best hour this week. So we'll find out. But I'm looking forward to having you, Mark. I'm just going to say see you tomorrow. I'm putting it out there. Try to get positive thoughts.
I love it, Gary. I'll call you in a bit. Thank you.
Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.